Welcome, everybody, to DrunkWooky.com. This is Adam Pritchard, a.k.a. DrunkWooky, and I'm interviewing Ryder Windham today. We're coming up on the 25th anniversary of Shadows of the Empire, and Ryder was editor at Dark Horse during the 90s for titles such as, the list is so long, Dark Empire 2, Droids, Heir to the Empire, X-Wing Rogue Squadron, River of Chaos, and he was the writer on Droids, Jedi Quest, Qui-Gon, and Obi-Wan. Thank the Maker, which is my favorite story he did for Star Wars Tales. Shadowstalker, Savage Opress's first appearance on Free Comic Book Day 2011. Strange Allies, which had a Chiss Jedi, and I think that's the only Chiss Jedi I've ever seen. Vader Adrift, which is actually coming out in the forthcoming Star Wars Insider fiction collection. I'm not sure if Ryder's aware of that. And the Battle of the Bounty Hunters pop-up comic, which he was nice enough to send me his personal file copy of with a note to my mom inside. That was very nice. And, of course, the Shadows of the Empire comic book, which is primarily what we're talking about today. So did I miss anything, Ryder?
No, you got everything. I don't think I worked on anything else.
No, you worked on a lot of stuff. Yeah. So, we have the Shadows of the Empire 25th anniversary coming up first week of May here. And as it turns out, you're on eBay right now selling off a lot of your file copies that were sent to you by Lucasfilm and Dark Horse, and I would imagine others like probably Bantam Books or Del Rey or the toy companies such as Hasbro and things like that for your works in that. So I guess, the question that's been going around in my mind the past couple of days is how a multimedia event like Shadows of the Empire really came about, because it was a novel, the Dark Horse comics, that pop-up comic. We had the Kenner action figures with the ridiculous He-Man chests on them, and my favorite one was Chewbacca with the crew cut and the eye patch. And then the Micro Machines. Yeah, you remember that? So I guess it's kind of I have a chicken or the egg question. Where did that all come down from in your perspective as editor and writer over at Dark Horse at the time?
Well, I was editing. I edited Star Wars titles at Dark Horse, or Lucasfilm titles. I also worked on Indiana Jones comics from 1992 to 1995, and my earliest recollection of Shadows of the Empire was that Lucasfilm Licensing's book division, there was an editor who remains a great friend, Alan Couch, phoned me and told me that there was a plan for a multi-licensee crossover event from a Star Wars project that would encompass comics, novels, games, toys, everything. And as I recall, the head of Lucasfilm licensing was Howard Rothman, and in the publishing division of Lucasfilm licensing, it was Alan Couch's supervisor, Lucy Autry Wilson. And I think, again, my memories are a little sketchy on this, but I think that Howard Rothman and Lucy Wilson, they came up with the idea that there should be a multi-license project that had some kind of a story that wove everything together. And they had, I guess their initial plan was to come up with some story that was set between Star Wars and The Empire Strikes Back. But what I remembered this, there was a John Knowles, who was at LucasArts, and he was the lead artist and game designer. John was the one who suggested setting the story in between Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi, because and everybody at Lucasfilm roundly agreed, yeah, there's sort of dramatic opportunities about just because of the cliffhanger ending of that Empire Strikes Back and lots of things going on. So anyway, that's how it initially started, but that as far as why, I think another question might be, why did Shadows of the Empire happen when it did? And the reason for that was Lucasfilm licensing was essentially dormant as far as Star Wars goes for most of the late 1980s, or that after Return of the Jedi and the Ewoks and Droids TV series. I know there was West End Games was involved in doing. I mean, they had sort of kept Star Wars alive in some capacity, but it came down to that by 1994, George Lucas was making rumblings about that he was ready to begin work on the prequels, and there was and then there was also talk at Lucasfilm about re-releasing the original Star Wars trilogy, and with all these licensees, because I mean, if you look before Shadows of the Empire, there were comics, there were novels that kind of sometimes we hoped tied in together, and there were toys, but everything was kind of independent of each other. And Lucasfilm figured, okay, if we're going to be coming up with prequels soon enough, everyone has to be working together. And so what Lucasfilm wanted to do was see how could they get everyone working together. So Shadows of the Empire was essentially a test for all of the licensees involved to see, could we play well together? Could we maintain, and as far as maintaining continuity on, with various aspects of this one project. So that's how it came about. Things really came to, I mean, for me anyway, it really became clear that, okay, this is going to be a big deal. There was Lucasfilm had a licensee summit meeting. I think it was in November of 1994. I know it was late 94, autumn. And it was my first visit to Skywalker Ranch. And the so anyway, there were all these licensees that showed up, representatives from the toy companies and game companies and publishing houses. And what Lucasfilm reps had us do was there were presentations about the Shadows of the Empire project and just sort of discussions about what was involved, what the goals were for everyone to work together. But to me, the real highlight of the work aspect was that I got to Lucasfilm organized these. I think there were maybe 15-minute conversations, so that there are all these tables set up in a large banquet room, and we were told, okay, or I was told, Ryder, you're going to be sitting at table number 3 for 15 minutes, and then you move on to table number 5, and then table number 7. And so it was almost like, in hindsight, I suppose it was something resembling speed dating, which I learned about years later, but that it was
like orchestrated creativity, or
well, no, it was really just for everyone to sit down and meet at a table. So there's only maybe, I think there were maybe 8 people at each table. And we could just meet and talk for 15 minutes and swap business cards and figure out how we might work together. And it was during that batch of round of conversations, I recall meeting, there was some representatives from Louis Galoob Toys. And I suggested, what if Dark Horse were to produce mini comics? And then I said, wait, no, not that. Micro Comics because of the Micro Machines line that they did. I said that would be more appropriate. So I said, what if we did Shadows of the Empire Micro Comics that could be packaged with the toys? And they thought that was a great idea. And
I remember those. Those were some of the first Star Wars toys I think I ever had.
Wow.
I had just,
yeah,
and
now I remain. I'm a huge fan of the Galoob toys. I think they were brilliant.
But now looking back as a father, I'm like, wow, these were just choking hazards, weren't they? I can't believe this business model worked.
I'm sure. I know that there must have been, some sort of age limit guidance, parents' guide, on the package. But to me, as an adult collecting them, I thought, oh, these are for me. I thought they were wonderful. But I just remember
in the Slave One. I loved putting my little Han Solo and Carbonite inside the Slave One.
Oh right. The action fleet. Yeah.
Oh, the fleet. Yeah.
So another person that I met was a fellow, and I forgive me, I can't recall his name or the name of his company, but he had the rights to do. What was it? He was doing, I guess, what are they called? Serious cells, essentially reproductions of animation cells from droids and Ewoks, and also the Star Wars Holiday Special.
Oh.
And the cartoon. But what was funny was I sat down at the table, and he looked really glum. He was sitting there shaking his head, and he said, I really don't know why I'm even here, because I have the rights to, do these cells, and it has nothing, I don't have the rights to produce new things for Shadows of the Empire. And I said, well, actually, you've got you could do reproductions of Boba Fett and sell that to tie in with the, I said, Dark Horse Comics could place an ad for your line, and so that people could see. So right there, I made a new best friend, because he was like, "Thank you, that hadn't even occurred to me." And I said, "Well, that's why we're here, to figure this out." But it was funny mentioning Boba Fett. I realized I kind of jumped ahead, because prior to the November summit meeting, and I don't know just when it was, but probably late summer, early autumn, there was I guess you'd call it an editorial meeting that was held at Dark Horse's office, and in Oregon, and John Knowles of LucasArts was there, and so was Lucy Wilson from Lucasfilm Licensing, and so was Steve Perry, who was the writer hired to work on the novel. And I was there, and I also brought in Killian Plunkett, because as soon as I got the assignment, and started thinking about, okay, who do I want to work with on this? I picked Killian Plunkett for the artwork, the interior artwork, Hugh Fleming for the cover art, and John Wagner to write the scripts. So, and it was during that editorial meeting that, because it was funny, I thought that it was going to be a meeting so that we could, I think it was called the story meeting. So I thought, oh, this is good, because we'll be able to sit there and we'll talk about the story and what we think it should be about, and how, what I didn't realize was that the game, that Lucasfilm already had pretty much an outline of a pretty tight outline of what they considered the story, and the story all hinged on the game. It was on the video game, computer game.
Yeah, the Nintendo 64 game, and I checked before our call to see if I had that downstairs. I was like, oh, I remember that game, and I loved it to death, and I had no idea what was going on, because I couldn't understand how it fit into the story. But I don't have it downstairs, so now I really want it so I can play it again.
And I suppose you'll need the equipment, to play it with. I mean, you should get an old TV also, so you can do it in style, right?
Yeah, luckily my wife is a huge Mario Kart fan, and so we have an N64, and I don't think she'll ever let us not have one. So.
Excellent. Okay. Well.
Yeah.
So what was funny though in the meeting was that Steve Perry produced. He said, "Well, I've prepared a story map based on what I understand of the." He'd already had discussions, and to me, I was kind of flummoxed because I thought, wait a minute, I thought we were going to talk about this story, and essentially everyone was telling me, the story's done. It's like here's what happens in this. Here's what's going to happen in the novel. Here's what's happening in the game. And there were a few things about the story that really bugged me as far as like what people were saying at the meeting.
No holds barred. Tell me what bugged you. Yeah.
The first thing that bugged me was Lucy Wilson's concept of the thing, or what she saw as a really dramatic, she saw a selling point in the book being, will Prince Shizor and Princess Leia have some kind of romantic fling? And there was, I just thought that really doesn't do the character of Leia justice at all. I mean, we all know the answer is no, they probably won't, because we also know what happens in Return of the Jedi, and it just seemed like we know where the story's going, and I understood that Lucasfilm was very keen on introducing a few new characters. But I was rankled by the idea that Jabba the Hutt had a boss. On some dumb fanboy level, I took that idea personally and in the wrong way. I thought, no, Jabba doesn't answer to anybody. That's what I thought at the time. It's like, what? He answers to this green guy? No, I don't think so.
But I've always thought, like, why is Jabba so intimidating? Like, I would just run away from him, wouldn't I? Like,
that's a good point. Yeah, no, he has minions.
Enforcers, but like, how does he keep the enforcers in line?
Yeah,
that's always been my.
I don't know. I've always loved Jabba, so but there were also things like. Dash Rendar, where I think everyone kind of readily agreed that okay, he's a kind of carbon copy of Han Solo, and he had that. And again, I understood Lucasfilm and what they've got a game. They want a character to run through the game. Kenner was keen on producing action figures and new vehicles, and I got all that, but I also knew from some experience that adapting a story adapting a game into a comic, or adapting a novel into a comic, it can be a challenge, but it also or even adapting a movie into a comic. And like, it's just like, okay. At the time, I was questioning the logic of adaptations because VHS was very popular. Everyone, it seemed, had a videotape player. So I remember wondering one day at Dark Horse, like, why would anybody buy a comic book adaptation which might say, hypothetically, say like a 4-issue series, and each issue might cost $2.50, and it comes out over the course of a few months. And I thought, in some cases, by the time the 4th or 5th, 6th issue, whatever finishes up the adaptation, by the time that issue comes out, you can go to Blockbuster Video and you can rent that movie for $3 or so.
Yeah.
And it's like, why? Is there? What do you really? Do people really want to get these adaptations? So. With that on my mind and listening to everybody telling me what the story was about, I kind of called a timeout and said, wait a minute, what's going on with Darth Vader and Boba Fett in this story? because I again, as something like as an aging fanboy at the time, I was in like, oh goodness, I think I was 30-ish or so, that I said, I thought, I'm not so interested in these new characters. I'd like to know what's going on with characters that I actually cared about when I was a kid.
Yeah.
And so what I learned is like, well, Darth Vader's kind of in the shadows of the Empire, and Boba Fett, well, he's on the run because he's got Han Solo and the other, but nobody had considered them at all. I mean, really, there wasn't any thought about what they were up to, and I pounced on the opportunity and said, okay, this is what the comic is going to be about. It's going to be about, it's like, we'll incorporate the information about, I'll make sure that we have appearances by Prince Shizor and by Dash Rendar and other characters, but I said I really think the focus of this would be more interesting if it's about how everybody is after Boba Fett, not only the rebels who are trying to rescue Han Solo, but the Imperials, because maybe Vader still wants to get a hold of Solo to make sure that he can capture Luke Skywalker, but it's also the other bounty hunters.
Because that kind of fell apart at the end of Empire Strikes Back. He didn't capture Luke, and so maybe he wants another.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the plan being, it seems that there's going to be use Luke Skywalker as bait use Han Solo as bait, as a trap to capture Luke Skywalker. But that it struck me as like, okay, well, is there a reason? Why doesn't Boba Fett go directly to Vader? Why does he wind up? It's like obviously because Jabba plays the bounty, but so did Vader. So I was trying to figure out, like, can we come up with a sort of a dramatic, action-filled story that really doesn't have much to do with will Princess Leia be able to resist the reptilian charms of Prince Shizor? Like, I don't care about that. I want to see. Yeah. So that was my if anyone enjoyed the comic, I'd say you're welcome, because I think it could have been I don't know, not as much fun. So.
Well, I think I've read the comic series, probably a dozen, maybe more times over the years. And I think Steve Perry's novel, I'm going to show my lack of chops in the real book fandom world, but I think the actual novel, I've read it twice, maybe once carefully, because I don't know why. Just never really got around to it, and comics were always my thing growing up, But it was an interesting concept, and I think it's interesting that at the time it was a big deal to cross over that many licensees and mediums, but now it seems like Marvel does this with everything, like everything has some sort of tie-in push with toys for everything, video games for everything, a comic and a novel, and plus there's the.
But to be fair, I mean, you could go back and say, with the release of the first Star Wars movie, licensing really hadn't kicked in because they were, no one knew how popular the first movie was going to be. But when The Empire Strikes Back came out, that they realized, oh, okay, we need to get this licensing thing to work better, so that when The Empire Strikes Back came out, there were toys, there were comics, there was a novelization, there was the making of book. There were children's audio books. There, they all, and that's just, I'm just thinking about the publishing, but the games, T-shirts, everything that was coming out. So I'd say in a lot of ways, Lucasfilm really set the standard, that Marvel and whatnot follows. Granted, Disney owns them all now anyway, but that
Yeah.
back then, I can't think of any other. Before The Empire Strikes Back, I can't think of any movie that came out with just such an enormous amount of licensing and merchandising.
And I'd say that probably the contribution Shadows of the Empire had is if you read the book or if you read the comics or just play the video game like I did, I think the video game was probably the first thing I did. You don't get the full story. There are little tidbits of the whole story across the whole event, right? So
right.
that type of thing. I mean, we have coming out next month. There's Charles Soule's. I don't want to reduce it before I even read it, but his version of Shadows of the Empire, which is going to be War of the Bounty Hunters. Boba Fett's on the run with Han Solo and Carbonite in tow, and all the other bounty hunters, Darth Vader and the Rebellion, are after him to try and take Han Solo off his hands. But and that's going to be across all the different post-Empire Strikes Back comic books in the Marvel line. But there's no tie-in video game, or action figures, book, or anything like that. So I think Shadows of the Empire is still unique in that sense. That
I think
you have
what's most
by reading it.
I think what's most unique about it, and the way I neglected to describe it I mentioned the reason why Lucasfilm wanted to do it as a test to find out could the licensees all work together. But as far as how the project was pitched was, think of this as essentially a project with it's all how do they put it? Something like think of it as a movie that's coming out with a lot of licensing and merchandising, except there's no movie.
Yeah.
Which it's something like it's going to everything that you can imagine for from posters. There was even a soundtrack that they went all out, but that what was it lacking? It was there wasn't a Shadows of the Empire movie. So but yeah, I think that was maybe the most unique aspect of it. But it got fans hungry for wanting to see a movie too, and just to see because in 1997 the special editions were released, so that it definitely whet the appetites for Star Wars fans.
So did it sort of illustrate or advise what Dark Horse could do with an expanded universe comics after that? Did it show sort of what the margins that they could take some creative license with were? I think
no. Even before that, Dark Horse. When I started working at Dark Horse in 1992, they were already a few issues into publishing Star Wars Dark Empire, the first series by Tom Veitch and Cam Kennedy. And I can't remember exactly what year that takes place, but it's after the events of Return of the Jedi. So that and I worked on droids, so that as far as sort of creative leeway, I think Dark Horse had already demonstrated that it could come up with new stories and introduce new characters, situations. So that wasn't. The challenge with Shadows of the Empire really was to try to make everything kind of cohesive, so that you could read the novel, play the game, read the comics, and not. If there were continuity glitches, they were minor enough that I don't remember anybody writing me a hate letter about them. Yeah, it was really more. The challenge was more about maintaining or developing and maintaining continuity than I don't know. I don't think anybody felt creatively stifled. We just felt like, okay, here's the rules. Lucasfilm's calling the shots on this one, but they're also giving us leeway with what we can do on the comics with Vader and Boba Fett.
Yeah. Well, how would you feel if some of those characters did pop up, next month going into that new comic event? Would you feel anything?
No, it has long been my policy. It's not just that I am ambivalent, but about it. If I'm not getting paid to think about Star Wars, I'm not thinking about Star Wars. And I know that sounds crass, but it comes down to I
wish I had that.
Yeah, it's just I've been even back when, oh goodness, I mean, just to kind of come clean, I haven't had any offers to do Star Wars assignments in over 2 years now, and I'm kind of comfortable thinking it's like, well, I guess I had a good run with it. But when people say, "Hey, are you excited about this new stuff that's coming out?" It's like I'm not even aware of it. So I'm just not. I mean, I have other things that I can do, but but even when I was when I was working as an editor at Dark Horse, there were times people would say, "Oh, you should read this novel," or maybe it might have been, it could have been somebody maybe Alan Couch at Lucasfilm he would send me everything, just like, "Oh, here's some novels," and sometimes I remember him saying, it's like, "Oh, you might want to read this because, let's say, like an X-Wing novel." I know that I read the first few.
The Stackpole.
Yeah, Michael Stackpole stuff, which I really enjoyed. But I think I read the first 3, and. But I realized too, it's like, okay, the comics that we're doing and the novels, I just needed to sort of know the characters. But at some point, Alan said, "Oh, we have this other series. Shall I send you these?" And I said, "Alan, what would be really helpful is if you can send me a synopsis for each novel. All I want to know is who lives, who dies, what explodes. Just the short version because I don't know that I'll ever need to use these for reference." And again, if any fans say like, "Oh, gee, Ryder Windham sounds like he's just a sad old man," I think if they check my work, they'll see I always do research. I mean, if I need to, or even sometimes if I want to, I'll. If I get, I never felt hell bent on creating something new just for the sake of creating something new, because I thought I know what the Star Wars fans appreciate if they read something, they'll say, "Oh, Ryder's revisiting this planet that was introduced once in a Marvel comic years ago."
Yeah,
and or in the syndicated comic strip by Al Williamson and Archie Goodwin. I loved those strips. So and at various times I would just sort of dredge up some story aspect from those strips to incorporate them into new stories. And I did that because I'm genuinely fond of the material, and I thought that would be more interesting to me than to develop something new. But do I read every new thing? I haven't. Unless somebody sends something to me, and unless there's I've got an assignment that somehow demands that I should really study this. It's like, no, I'm really oblivious. So.
One piece of it is getting a little bit of buzz right now in the collectors community, which is you did a book all about stormtroopers. Do you remember this?
I do. Yes.
And, and there's a reference in it that this this squad of stormtroopers called Task Force 99 from Jason Aaron's latest run on Marvel Star Wars was named after Clone Force 99, which is the Bad Batch, which is a squad of clone troopers who are starring in a cartoon that's coming out May 4th. And so a lot of people are looking at it and they're saying, hey, there's this link here, and it says they're named after Clone Force 99. Are these the same guys? We don't see them under the helmet. Are these the same guys? So I just thought you'd be interested to know that a lot of people are pointing to that right now.
Well, for what it's worth, I'm pretty sure that Adam Bray, the co-author on that book, the Stormtrooper book, I'm pretty sure he wrote that because I can't remember what my cutoff point, but the way Adam and I divided up the work was that, I think I covered Stormtroopers from, I can't remember. Did I go all the way up through maybe just after Return of the Jedi to some of the Marvel comics? I know that I covered things in the 1980s, but I think he picked up. I essentially wrote, say, the first half of the book, and he wrote the second. So I was a huge fan. I am a big fan of the Clone Wars TV series, and so that I remember I like the Clone Troopers, and you mentioned a story I wrote, Vader Adrift, which was that was another case of I know I recycled a Star Wars. It was an old Marvel Star Wars comic where I got. People wonder, how do you work? Do you sit around making up stories? No, everything that I do is by way of an assignment for Star Wars stuff. And so with the Vader Adrift, it started off. I was working on I worked on a Darth Vader book called The Complete Vader, a nonfiction book, coffee table book, similar to the Stormtrooper book. Just a heavily illustrated, very researched nonfiction book about histories of the characters. And I think I completed working on The Complete Vader, and an editor at Del Rey. I forget just how it got rolling, or it might have been. I know an editor contacted me about writing a short story about Vader that would appear in the Star Wars Insider magazine, and that's all I had to go by. They didn't say. I asked, well, when do you want the story to take place? Well, do you have any ideas? Oh, great, thanks a lot. So I started thumbing through issues of the Marvel's original run of Star Wars from the 1980s, and I found there was one issue where it seemed like, okay, between this issue and several issues later, Darth Vader seems to be sort of down for the count or missing or something. Maybe I can work a story into that continuity. And because I just thought, why not? It seemed like even though what continuity rules change and whatnot, I just thought readers might kind of get a kick out of seeing Vader and going back to this world. But I also had the idea of using an older stormtrooper, or rather a stormtrooper who had previously served in the Clone Wars as a clone trooper, but now was serving the Empire. And I came up with that on my own just because I thought, to me, it just seemed to make it a more emotionally compelling story. The idea that Vader would have an encounter with someone who'd served with him back when he was Anakin Skywalker. So anyway, forgive me, I digress. I've strayed wildly from your question. But
I don't know.
I don't remember either. But it's just I guess You mentioned that the story that I wrote was going to be coming out in some new anthology. Unless some editor out there is listening to me and can actually, pay me royalties or something, then I just think, yeah, good luck with that. Good luck with that reprint, because if I'm not making money off of it and you are, well, shame on you. So
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I don't say that with much bitterness. All the work I do is work for hire. It's work for a flat fee. But I mean, the reality is that it's been publicized enough that Disney does not honor royalties to authors who had negotiated royalty payments for their works on certain Star Wars novels, and I think, well, if that's the game they're playing now, I don't have to say anything nice about them.
Yeah.
So yeah. Oh well.
Yeah, and I mean, and I love the stories. I love the universe, and I just am under no spell or fantasy that the business behind it isn't as I don't know, cutthroat and dirty as all the other businesses I've ever known. So I mean,
I've always, it's funny. For all my work on Star Wars, I always likened it that I felt like something of a mechanic. That someone, someone would bring their car in and say, "Hey, can you work on this?" And I'll say, "When do you need it by?"
Yeah.
How far is this trip you're taking? But I'd work on it, and then the car leaves, and I just think, unless there's a problem, I'm done working on that car. But I'm hoping that maybe I did a good enough job that the driver will remember me well enough that they'll come back and ask for more.
Yeah.
And but it's like, yeah, since Disney bought Lucasfilm, I literally don't know any editors who are working on Star Wars books anymore. I mean, all the publishing has shifted and changed. So yeah, it's kind of I don't know. It's just things change.
Well, I guess there were worse ways to make money while you were doing it.
This is true.
And,
I appreciate that. The best thing I can say about selfishly my work on Star Wars is that, yes, I made money over the years, and it also introduced me to a lot of really wonderful people, some great friends. I mean, I just
that's what it's about.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, did you wanna tell us what books you have going up on eBay?
Yeah. Well, I can't tell you just yet, but a few months ago, I started just going through my collection of comics and books, things that publishers and editors had sent to me over the years, and just realized I had a lot of extras of various titles. And my wife is delighted that I'm selling things and cleaning out the attic. And oh gosh, I mean, like something that I'm getting ready to list. I have copies of Star Wars Missions and Episode 1 Adventures. These were books that were Scholastic hired me to write, and Scholastic distributed them through their subscription service, so that they were never sold in bookstores. And I worked on a lot of these things. So I mean, I'm getting ready to list those. I'm also going through Shadows of the Empire. I have copies of the comics and the novels. I found a set of the Galoob toys, and on the one hand, it sort of pains me to say goodbye to them, but I just think, I think somebody else could use these more than I've been using them. So, I am selling just anything I can lift that has a Star Wars name on it. I'm putting it on eBay.
Well, I'm the proud recipient of some of your file copies. I love them.
Adam, I appreciate your business and your enthusiasm. I genuinely
Yeah.
It's like when we connected that way. That was a delightful introduction. It's nice doing business with a Star Wars fan.
Yeah, my favorite is, of course, as I told you, the War of the. I don't think it's War of the Bounty Hunters. I think it's Battle of the Bounty.
Yeah.
Pop-up comic book, and it was a book that I would go with my mom to the Walmart, and I would always see it, and I would ask her for it, and she'd say no, it's too expensive. It was something like 4 times more expensive than a normal comic book, and she flipped through it, and she thought, no, that's too expensive, and we're going to get you something else. And I never ended up getting it after the fact, growing up, getting my own jobs and wasting my own money on things. And finally, you sent me a copy, and there was a note in there and basically telling my mom that she was right to not buy me that.
Yeah, well, I guess just to explain that, I thought your mother was right as far as the the price. If you compare it with comic books, where you think, okay, you can read Battle of the Bounty Hunters probably inside of 2 minutes, if that. I think that it's a really pretty quick read. So I understood why your mother would be reluctant to buy you the book, but that the plus side, where I think the book is really great, is that it is essentially a handmade book, and that's why it's as expensive as it is. That all those, you might think it's like, oh, this is just like spat out by some machine, and it's like no, like all of those little fold-outs, and the way the book, each one of those books is assembled by hand, is glued.
Oh, geez, I didn't know that.
Yeah, that's why the pop-up books tend to be more expensive. That there are die cutting tools that are used to cut out the illustrations, but as far as actually assembling them so that they're ready to be shipped off to a bookstore or a bookseller, yeah, they're all put together by hand. So that's why. Think of it. It's not just it's a work of art. It was funny, but even Battle of the Bounty Hunters, I was at Dark Horse. I think that was it was after the summit meeting at Lucasfilm licensing or at Skywalker Ranch. That it's a funny story about how that one came about. I got a call from Lucy Wilson at Lucasfilm, and she said, "Ryder, we want Dark Horse to publish a Star Wars pop-up comic book." And I said, but Lucy, doesn't Ballantine have the rights to pop-up books for Star Wars? And Lucy said, I'll never forget, she said, "You weren't listening, Ryder. I said a Star Wars pop-up comic book." And I said, what's the difference between a pop-up book and a pop-up comic book? And she said, "You have to figure that out." And I thought, oh, for gosh sakes, thanks a lot. So it was kind of an easy decision. I didn't think very long about it, where I thought, well, I guess if we put the images in panels and we put speech balloons in for the characters and we make it pop, I guess that constitutes a pop-up comic book.
Yeah.
But that I also got almost into a wee bit of trouble with my supervisors on that one, because when I realized the deadline for when the book, because the book was going to be assembled by hand, and I got in touch with Mary Luders, who was the editor at White Heat it's a pop-up book company in New Mexico, and she worked with the head of the company was, oh goodness, James Diaz, and it's like neurons are clicking right now because it's just like white heat. I hadn't thought about the visit to white heat in a while, but what I found out is I was like, okay, this comic or the script for this and the layouts, this needs to be done immediately. And my background, before I was a comic book editor, I worked as a graphic designer and a freelance cartoonist, illustrator, and that's what I'd studied in college, so that I was editing comics, but it came down to I know about graphic design and production and also about illustration. And so I told my supervisors, I said, look, the time it's going to take me to find an available writer and bring them up to speed on this project and also get Lucasfilm to sign off and approve of, doing this and having them setting up meetings with White Heat. I said it comes down to I could write this thing over the weekend and just I could do the layouts. I said I can get this thing done. It's like, well, it seems like you're setting yourself up to be almost irreplaceable. I said, oh no, you can fire me at any moment. Just go right ahead. But if you want this thing to come out on time, I think so. Anyway, they finally agreed and they sent me off to meet with the folks at White Heat, and Jim Diaz and I had lunch, and he was a paper engineer and worked on my goodness knows how many pop-up books. But that we were having lunch at a restaurant, and we wound up drawing the layouts for that on a paper tablecloth. Just like over the course of lunch, and we pretty much did the whole thing. And there was this this one part of the story where Jim said, it's like, okay, and forgive me, I can't remember the exact number of spreads in the book, but he said, I guess for the budget on the project that they could accommodate, I think it was maybe eight spreads, each 8 consecutive spreads, and we'd come up with 6, and he said, we need one more, and I said, well, how about between this page and that page, just before Boba Fett enters Jabba's palace, how about this giant sand dragon comes leaping up at him, and then he blasts it or jumps out of the way. And Jim looked at me like I was kind of nuts and said, is that? Can you do that? Is that? It's like I said, no one's stopping us. I think that'll work. So it was very.
I remember it was like Jabba's way of trying to weasel out of paying a bounty or something like that.
Something like that. Who knows?
Yeah.
But it was. Yeah, it seemed like no, it was a fun project. So I don't have any regrets over it, and I'm glad that you finally got your copy, and I hope your mother approves that that you didn't have to spend much money on it either. So
no. Well, thanks for doing an interview for me and for us.